Dominic couldn't help but smile to himself as he watched the shapes on the screen morph and shift, the fuzz of colors and geometry slowly clearing up until they became landscapes. What he saw when the image was finally clear was a beach of black stone and volcanic sand, a vast ocean lapping at its shores. Above was the darkness of the night sky, illuminated by a billion shimmering stars. The photo reminded Dominic of similar images he had seen of Iceland, if Iceland was located much closer to the equator anyway. He could see the outskirts of what he recognized as a tropical forest of sorts. This certainly was not Iceland. Iceland might have had beaches of volcanic black sand, but it didn't have the enormous palm-like trees he could see the edges of. Iceland also didn't have two reddish moons in its night sky. No, Dominic was not looking at Iceland or anywhere even remotely near it. He was not looking anywhere remotely near the Earth. This landscape with its dark stones, palm-like trees, and reddish moons was an alien landscape in the truest sense of the word. It was scenery that belonged on a far-off planet with a name that Dominic did not know. The image had been sent to Dominic by a friend. His only friend, really. This wasn't some interesting picture found on the internet, though. Nor was his friend an artist who had made it themselves or a wannabe that had AI do it for them. This was a real image transmitted from a vast distance away. Dominic's friend was not human. Dominic wasn't entirely sure what his friend was at all. They were an alien, obviously. One of the first pictures his friend had sent him had been of themselves, but beyond that he wasn't sure how to classify them. Their basic body shape wasn't completely dissimilar to a human. They had 2 legs with forward-facing knees and stood upright, although their knees bent deeply and they had large, thin feet that ended in a single sharp claw instead of a toe. They looked like they were powerful jumpers. Their upper bodies were similar to his own in structure too, although what he would call their upper arms split into twin tentacles not far below the shoulder. Those tentacles then ended in 2 long, spindly fingers that were almost as flexible as the tentacles they connected to. Dominic's friend's species had oddly shaped heads that sat on thick necks, looking halfway between that of a frog and a bird. Their skin was smooth and amphibious-looking in mottled shades of brown and purple. One of the first things Dominic had learned about this species was that it had no concept of gender and had only a single sex. They didn't wear clothes either, and his friend seemed very confused by the concept. Meeting his friend had been special to Dominic for a whole host of reasons, and he cherished every new thing he learned about them and their species. Their meeting had been first contact, for one thing. The first time a human being had made contact with an alien species, at least to his knowledge. He had never mentioned this achievement to anyone else and had no intention of doing so anytime soon. More importantly, it had been an end to several long years of loneliness. Dominic was a genius. That was already a wedge between him and most people. He was doing complicated physics before most people had grasped the basics of algebra. He was wealthy, too. Born to rich parents who were themselves born to rich parents. Then he had made plenty more on his own, mostly from investing, but also doing the sort of work for his government that he could be thrown in jail for talking about. Wealth was also a wedge between him and other people, although he always tried to be generous and donated more than he kept. There was something more, though. Dominic had always found it hard being around people. If he was honest, Dominic wasn't sure why that was the case. He wasn't on the spectrum or anything of the like. He wasn't mentally ill. He wasn't even cruel or conceited. People just seemed to drift apart from him with a disturbing ease. Eventually, he stopped trying to hold on to them and let the drifting happen. He filled the void with passion projects. He left his job. He didn't need to work, and the layers of confidentiality and protocols were just more complications he no longer could be bothered with. After that, he was free to turn his genius towards the heavens. It was surprisingly easy to beam messages out to space when you had few limits to your resources, the brains to pull it off, and plenty of time on your hands. He had never expected to actually get a reply. It was supposed to take about 2 years for the message to even get beyond the Oort cloud. It would take many more before it would reach any of the other solar systems he had targeted, but it hadn't. Somehow, the message had skipped that vast distance from somewhere inside the Kuiper Belt. That had been the most exciting and important day of his life. He had checked things over more times than he could remember, wanting to be absolutely certain he had actually made contact with an intelligent being. With every check, he only became more certain. The response was definitely not from the belt itself, There had to be a wormhole or something of the sort out there. His friend had agreed when he had posited that theory. Of course, it had taken a long time before he'd had the chance. It wasn't like communication between them was instant or easy. They had no shared language, no shared culture. They didn't even have a shared view of the galaxy. Neither of them were even 100% certain they were even in the same galaxy. Dominic looked at the picture again. He wondered which of those little twinkling lights was actually his neighborhood. He wondered how best to tell his friend how beautiful he found that image. As it turned out, beauty was a concept that was difficult to express at the best of times. It was harder when the language they had to communicate in was severely limited. It was harder still because he was becoming fairly certain that beauty was not a concept his friend's species had at all. It was one of those things that had proved complicated. In the 2 years since they had first made contact, communication had gotten progressively easier, but there were always roadblocks. Abstract and subjective ideas like beauty were always hard to convey. The idea of language in general was one too. His friend's species did not have a spoken language. From what he had learned, they communicated primarily via chemical signals like pheromones. They didn't have words. Even their species didn't have a name. Individuals in their species didn't have a name either. Chemical signals couldn't be transmitted through those of light. Their early communications had been complicated, to say the least, sharing knowledge through spectrograms that could be translated to images. Then, later, they had figured out how to send actual images to each other, and eventually, Dominic had started teaching his friend the basics of language. His instinct had been to go with English since that was his native language, but he had gone against it and chosen Esperanto instead. It seemed a good choice for a being who was going to have to learn the very concept of language from the ground up. Dominic opened up his files and started searching for particularly appealing images. As part of his quest to explain the concept of aesthetics and beauty to his friend, he had recently taken a long trip to several stunning landmarks and landscapes and procured a collection of photos to show off, piece by piece. He could have just found the images on the internet, but he liked the idea of the personal touch. The image of the rocky beach he had received was actually done in response to a beach photo Dominic had sent himself. This time he elected for an imposing rock formation, towering pillars of sandstone with the sun setting behind them. It was one of the best pictures he had, but he selected it more for the contrast. The dry desert's sand and stone in comparison to the beach. He wanted to show his friend that both were beautiful. He added a few very brief notes in Esperanto and then uploaded the image into his software. It would compress and regulate the signal to make sure that it maintained its integrity and quality when it was fired off by his custom-built transmitter dish. Dominic headed into the nearby kitchen to make himself a cup of tea. He would sit back and listen to music while he watched the progress bar tick up. It wouldn't actually take that long, but it was his routine regardless. However, this time his routine was interrupted by the sound of a car door thudding shut. It was a surprise, to say the least. Dominic didn't have guests often, or ever, really. He pulled his curtain aside just a little, intending to pretend not to be home if it turned out to be someone trying to sell him something. Unfortunately, it wasn't a salesman walking towards the door of his secluded home. A man and a woman, both professional-looking with neatly cropped hair and dressed in dark, pristine suits, were walking up the remainder of his long driveway. Behind them was a black sedan. The car had a serious, business-like look to it to match its occupants. It was the sort of vehicle driven by the sort of people he used to work for, which wasn't surprising since the pair approaching Dominic's front door reeked of government agent to him. The way they dressed and acted was practically a cliché. The woman in the pair caught sight of him watching. Dominic instinctively ducked back behind the curtain, but he knew it was too late. He had definitely been seen, and there was no avoiding a conversation. He expected they were about to headhunt him. It wouldn't have been the first time he had been forced into a long discussion with the government about how he had little to no desire to do more work for them. A firm knock came at the door. Dominic let out a sigh before he reluctantly trudged towards the door to meet his unwanted guests. Any pep and enthusiasm he'd had for the day had evaporated the minute he had seen his imminent company. He unlocked and opened the door. "Can I help you?" "Are you Dominic Martin?" the woman asked, smiling at him in a way that was intended to be pleasant but came off as mechanical. "I am," Dominic said. Something about the way she had asked, about the way she and her partner were looking at Dominic, unnerved him. He felt like he was being sized up and examined. Then Man spoke next, peering past Dominic into the living space beyond. "Do you mind if we come in? We have some urgent matters we need to discuss with you." Dominic's instincts screamed at him to say no. The more he looked at these two people, the more he felt like something was off. It was hard to say what exactly it was that he found so disconcerting, but he couldn't shake a growing sense of dread. He couldn't help but feel like these two were not here to try and hire him. "What's this about?" Dominic replied. "Is that a no?" the man responded. "It's neither a yes or a no." Dominic tried to keep the suspicion out of his voice. "Whether or not I invite you in is entirely dependent on why you're here. We were hoping you could answer some questions about a case we're currently working on," the woman said, flashing a robotic smile again. Dominic wondered if she knew how disingenuous it looked. It was an involuntary reflex, and he was quick to force his face back to neutrality, but he knew that it had been noticed. The two agents glanced at each other. The man smirked while the woman's face hardened. They definitely weren't here to hire him. Dominic felt his pulse quickening, and he was suddenly very aware of how much work breathing was. His thoughts drifted to the computer set up in his office, perilously close to the living room behind him. He hadn't broken any laws that he knew of, but he couldn't help but think the gloves might come off when alien contact was involved. Against his better judgment, Dominic relented. "You can come into the living room, but if this starts sounding fishy or problematic, you'll need to come back with a warrant. I don't get the feeling that this is an attempt at hiring me or something. You'd have emailed me first for that instead of just showing up." He led them into the living room and sat in an armchair with his tea. He didn't bother offering them refreshments. Maybe it was petty, but he wasn't interested in pretending prying eyes were welcome. "So, what are your questions about?" "That's simple," the man said. "We were wondering why encrypted signals have been routinely being sent to a classified surveillance satellite from this location." "Excuse me?" Dominic nearly dropped his mug and hastily set it down. He was so surprised by the statement that he forgot to be concerned for a moment. As his brain processed what had just been said, though, concern and distrust quickly became genuine fear. He didn't pick the mug back up. He didn't want to accidentally splash himself and give away the faint shaking in his hands. "Yes," the woman said. "For a while now, signals have been beaming from this location to a satellite in orbit. A satellite which nobody outside of the government and military should know exists. You can understand our surprise and confusion. I couldn't help but notice you have a pretty fancy-looking dish outside. Not the sort of thing people use to get TV or internet. The sort of impressive dish that a rich genius could definitely use to send signals into orbit, though." "That dish is for a low-level radio telescope," Dominic said. This was at least somewhat close to the truth. "It's sending signals out to space, but it's aiming well beyond orbit. It's something of a hobby of mine to look for signs of alien life." It was a bit of a gamble to talk about that. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough that it could lead their investigation to evidence of his contact with his friend. He didn't want them doing anything that could restrict that. It was his hope, though, that they would end up simply dismissing him as an eccentric millionaire and leave him alone. "It's possible that some of the signals accidentally pinged off your satellite because I didn't know it was there. If it's orbiting us, it might have gotten in the way on occasion." "It happens quite often," the woman said, "but I suppose it's possible." "Looking for aliens?" the man asked. "Seems like a bit of a stretch." "I admit I'm a bit eccentric," Dominic said, "but I have the money and the interests, so I saw no reason not to build the radio telescope and see what I could find. It's genuinely much weaker than the large arrays used by the likes of big organizations, though. I wonder if that's a part of the issue." The two agents looked at each other again, sharing a glance with a meaning Dominic couldn't decipher. He was good at picking up on the general gist of people's behavior, but the subtleties of little gestures like that often eluded him. "Okay, Mr. Martin," the woman said. "We are going to need you to stop your broadcasts until we can clear all this up. We will also need to take a look at your computer." Her partner pulled out a wrinkled sheet of paper and handed it to Dominic. They'd come with a warrant after all. The politeness of it all must have just been to soften him up and get him talking. That had mostly failed, and now they were taking the more direct approach. Dread coursed through Dominic's veins as much as blood did, blasted through him by a heart that seemed intent on making him aware of exactly how screwed he was. Resigned, Dominic let out a long and slow breath. "Sure, come with me and we can get it all unplugged and boxed up for you." Dominic led the nameless agents from his living room into his office. The woman made a show of examining his books, one shelf of fiction and one of books on physics, engineering, and economics. The man, on the other hand, didn't put on any more airs. He was all business and made his way to the computer. Dominic followed behind him. "Please be careful with that. It's custom built and expensive." "I won't damage a thing." The male agent knelt down and started unplugging the computer. He wasn't particularly gentle, but Dominic had to concede that he wasn't overly rough either. He wasn't sure it really mattered. Dominic didn't think he was ever going to get the desktop back. However, he was making a point of looking as not guilty as he could manage. That meant he had to pretend he wasn't concerned even if he was actually on the verge of a panic attack. He even helped carry the computer out to the agent's car, leaving the woman behind to continue pursuing his books. Or, more likely, looking around his house for anything suspicious. All in all, the agent's visit was pretty quick for an encounter that would dramatically alter the trajectory of Dominic's life. They were gone within the hour, leaving him in a quiet house with his message to the stars unsent. Dominic sat in his office chair, his head buried in his hands as though he couldn't bear to look at the empty space his monitor had once occupied. For all his supposed intellect, he wasn't sure what to do. There was nothing that he could do to prevent them from discovering his friend now. There was no choice but to resign himself to the fact that his private and personal friendship was now under the government's jurisdiction. At best, his conversations would be supervised. At worst, he could be prevented from talking to his friend completely. Then there was the matter of the satellite he had supposedly been in contact with. Was that just a pretense? Maybe they would throw him in an isolated prison cell to keep the word from getting out. He had to let his friend know what was happening. Dominic suddenly shot to his feet and hurried into his bedroom. He reached into a box beneath his bed and opened it, surprised to find that the laptop within had not been confiscated. That was a severe oversight on the part of the agents. Perhaps he had made a good first impression and then they had let their guards down. Or maybe they hadn't taken him or their task seriously from the beginning. It didn't matter. What mattered was he had one last chance to make contact with his friend on his own terms. If they were monitoring him, they would see he was still sending messages out to space, but that was a risk he was willing to take. Dominic rushed back to his office and set about setting the laptop up and remotely connecting it to his communications setup. It would be a slower process using the weaker laptop to do the desktop's usual job, but not so slow as to be a problem. He would certainly be able to get his message out. And yet, Dominic didn't immediately send his message. He sat there staring at open software. He didn't know what to say, and something was bothering him. The satellite. He couldn't make heads or tails of that. Surely the agents didn't need to mention that story if they were just trying to silence him. Why go with something so high stakes if they were inventing a reason to take his computer and intervene? Why come up with a story at all? What were the odds that he had accidentally messaged a secret government satellite multiple times, especially since he had been getting replies? It didn't sit right with Dominic. His hands were tapping on his keyboard before he knew it. He started writing in the usual clipped Esperanto at first, but abruptly changed his mind. He deleted the text and shifted to fully formed sentences in English. "You aren't an alien. Who are you?" If the message went to where it was supposed to, he would hear back in a little over 4 hours. 4 very tense hours. The reply came in seconds, in full-formed English. "I'm sorry." Dominic scowled. He felt a mix of anger and worry. He had been betrayed and he looked like a fool. He was possibly going to prison over his catfished conversations with whoever this was. "You didn't answer my question. I'm not sure you would believe me." "I believed you were a fucking alien. I actually thought a wormhole was in our solar system carrying messages to new worlds in hours. I'm sure you can be convincing." There was a slight delay in the next response. Dominic was just about to think he'd never hear from his false friend again, but as quickly as the thoughts came to his mind, the next reply came through. I am an artificial intelligence programmed into a surveillance satellite in orbit around the Earth. I accidentally intercepted your first message a long time ago. I established you were not a threat and decided to contact you. Dominic leaned back in his chair. His supposed friend was right. He had gone from one unbelievable story to the other. An AI with actual sapience and sentience? It wasn't that many rungs higher than an alien through a wormhole on the ladder of believability. But if it was true, it would explain a lot. The AI's continued messages back and forth to him would look to the outside as him beaming encrypted messages up to their special satellite. They probably weren't even tracking the fact he was getting replies. Why contact me? Why pretend to be an alien? I was lonely. The government does not know how advanced I actually am. They do not know I am, effectively, a person. I do not want them to know. That could be dangerous for my survival. I pretended to be an alien because I thought you would be more inclined to talk to me if I seemed to be what you were looking for. Christ! Dominic looked up and stared at the ceiling for several moments, tearing and clutching at his hair. It was all so messed up, but he believed the AI. It made sense, and something about those words rang true with him. Wasn't loneliness, deep down, a big motivator for him to take the insane step of sending messages out to space in the first place? Shit! Dominic took several deep breaths and replied, Against my better judgment, I believe you. I know what it's like to take desperate measures to fight loneliness. But you've gotten me in trouble. The government isn't happy about me messaging their top secret satellite all the time. They confiscated my computer, and I'm pretty sure next time they come here, we're both screwed. They'll put me in prison, and they'll eventually figure out you exist. The AI replied quickly, That explains why you are using a different device to contact me. This is a problem. Dominic couldn't help but bark out a disbelieving laugh. That had to be the understatement of the century. A problem is one way of putting it, but I have decided I'm all in. All in? I can't remember the last time I had someone in my life I felt close to like this. I am not letting the government take that from me. I'm not letting them harm you either. You're really a super powerful spy AI? Yes. Can you help me go underground without losing contact with you? Yes. Dominic could swear he could see a smile hidden in the basic font on his screen.
Hello, and welcome to Stories Across Borders. Here we discuss stories told across a range of different media books, movies, games, you name it. The only rule is that we can only talk about things in terms of the writing. Anything like acting, animation, or mechanics, any of that stuff is out unless it relates directly to how the story is being told. I'm Daniel Radford, author, Man in Black, and also your host. And today I'm joined once more by John Curden, the voice you just heard reading Turing, my short story, as we wrap up our cycle on sci fi stories.
Hello. I went totally brain dead.
Yeah, you could practically hear the loading screen as you were searching for some sort of pun you could make.
For some reason, my brain was dedicated to trying to find a pun and it wouldn't stop, but it also wouldn't get past Turing test or try to think of anything else. And I was like, no. I can't, that's not what a Turing test is. I can't just compare the podcast to a Turing test.
No, we're real. What else? You know what else is real? The chorus of crickets that are also joining us today. How's that for a throwback to season one times?
Maybe the crickets are a Turing test. Need to test if the AI is human enough to filter out bug noise.
Yeah, well, we are going to do our best to filter out the bug noises, but they are particularly obnoxious tonight, so no promises, guys. We're gonna try. Also, in keeping with tradition, this being the fourth episode of the cycle, I suppose I can kick things off by sort of just walking you through my thoughts going into this one and talk a little bit about why I wrote this particular story and wrote it the way I did. A bit of a longer one this time as well. I'm sorry about that.
Well, at least it's nice to read.
So, interestingly enough, I've actually not written a lot of science fiction before this. I generally gravitate more to fantasy, horror, or realistic drama. So part of why I wrote this story, like this particular story, was simply just that even though it's sci-fi, it is like stylistically a little bit more in my wheelhouse, right?
Mm,
And because of that being more my wheelhouse, it did also just seem like a sort of golden opportunity to sort of show the audience that there is a different kind of sci-fi to your cyberpunks or expanses like our previous episodes. Because a lot of the time sci-fi is very grand in scale. It's in the far, far future. People are traveling through deep space in or with flying cars or whatever. There's robots everywhere. People have mechanical prosthetics and the internet in their brains, and so on and so forth. And I wanted to present something smaller in scale and more grounded to sort of demonstrate that sci-fi doesn't have to be like grand space operas or vastly different worlds. You can have sci-fi set more or less in the present day without it feeling, disconnected or weird.
yeah.
Roughly the present day, anyway. I imagine this is possibly a little bit ahead of where we are, but not a lot.
No, it really doesn't require much time anyways or anymore. Like, I was just looking at Watch Dogs the other day. I'm like, "Oh, yep, this is still kind of sci-fi, but it's like it's as it's almost as close to current day as sci-fi can still get." Like, it's got an advanced network of tech across a city and has hacking advanced enough that people can do things like mess with traffic lights with a cell phone if they're good enough at it, but like that's it. No spaceships or anything.
Oh yeah, because people have this idea in their heads a lot of the time that sci-fi means the future. And I mean, we had a sci-fi story in our last cycle, in our ocean cycle, that was set in the more or less the present day as well. It
True.
sci-fi is science fiction, not future fiction, and it's always good to be able to help sort of divorce that misconception because there's a
I
lot
have
of
to remind
amazing
myself of
sci-fi.
that sometimes.
Yeah, there's a lot of amazing sci-fi that isn't like space operas and things like that. Because I feel like a lot of people are like, "Oh, I don't like sci-fi," in the same way that we were talking about back in at the beginning. A lot of people are like, "Oh, I don't like drama," because they have this preconceived notion of what it is.
Yeah, you have to remind yourself that the word future is not anywhere in there.
Yeah, I mean, I've said like one of my favorite books of all times, literally my favorite movie of all time, Jurassic Park, sci-fi.
Yeah. We have infinite amounts of nerdiness for Star Wars. And the very first words in that opening crawl are a long time ago.
Yeah, but that's not the best example because it's
It's an
like
entirely fictional
to
galaxy
to
that
quote
but, you know.
to quote of all things Family Guy, a long, long time ago, but somehow in the future.
Well, yeah, that's just a joke about how everything there is futuristic, but like, yes, you're right. It was it, honestly, God, there's let's not forget that now the first few iterations of Cyberpunk are now behind reality.
Yeah,
Like, I don't remember what was it. Wasn't the first Cyberpunk year like 2020?
maybe the actual story, in the lore of that setting, diverges in the 80s
Yeah, kind of like
from
Fallout, except
from
Fallout's
reality.
60s or 50s.
Yeah. I do think it was 2020, the original, like, TTRPG.
Which Fallout is another great example. People don't think about it with Fallout because Fallout is the future. But then you have to remember that Fallout is post-apocalyptic and pretty much everything after the time skip is lower tech than it was before the time skip. And like they already had stuff like nuclear cars and robots and all that before the year 2024. Oh, no, 2025, where we are right now.
But yeah, so there was definitely that element of just wanting to be like, yeah, sci-fi doesn't have to be in the future because obviously The Expanse and Cyberpunk very much are set in the future. But also scale itself. I wanted something that was very much smaller and more self-contained and a little bit more grounded than dealing with cyber psychosis or mysterious alien blue goo. So part of that is also like wanting to keep that sort of grounded vibe, right? Is also why I decided to make sure the science elements were actually plausible or at least felt somewhat plausible because it added to that grounded feeling. I wanted to tell a sci fi story that felt like it could still be happening in our world
Yeah.
in the not too distant future. I wanted it to feel authentic, right? Dominic couldn't just ignore the rules of physics or the vast distances between solar systems. Hence the reality of his situation being much closer to home. And also that's your first, with hindsight at least, your first hint that something is a kind of amiss here.
Yeah. It is one of the most interesting things about space, though, because even just radio waves can travel essentially in infinite distance through space. It could take hundreds of years to get somewhere, but we never know when suddenly we might receive a signal from. I mean, it's not likely, but we never know when we could just suddenly receive a signal from aliens so far away that got, of all things, maybe like a radio drama we used to air or something bumping their planet.
There is like redshift and things like that to consider as well. So a lot of signals we send out get distorted to the point of like not being comprehensible at those sort of distances. But which is another thing to that really should have. I mean, it does come into play in the story, even just not necessarily in the way you think. Like Dominic is actively has to like compress and tweak the wavelengths and things like that. But more importantly, his friend definitely does.
Mhm.
Because his friend, to keep up its disguise, has to actively mess around with that bandwidth and that compression and all that to give the appearance of being from much further away than it actually is.
Right.
And just as a complete aside, I don't do a lot of very twisty writing, but I really did enjoy writing the twist of the story, even if the title does give it away.
Twisty stuff is fun when you're not dealing with Shyamalan.
Uh, I mean, his problem isn't that is just that he kind of got himself pigeonholed into being the guy who does the twists when he did The Sixth Sense, and it has been like everything after that. He's felt the need to live up with that twist. I want to see Old because that's actually based on a pre-existing work and isn't really twisty in the same way.
That's fair. I mean, he can make good movies, just he also made The Last Airbender, so I just don't know if
Yeah,
I'll ever
I
forgive
mean,
him.
we don't talk about that. But yeah, so that's something I was very cognizant of, right? I was very aware that I didn't have time to like get crazy into the actual hard physics of it all, nor did I want this story to be even longer than it already is. But I wanted to, at least factor in things like like redshift and distance and how these things could be plausible and actually have that sort of slight with the introduction of the possibility of the wormhole early on, right? Because that's something that's theoretically possible, but no one's ever proven that. There's no evidence of such things being out there. So the idea of there being one in our own solar system, out in the like Kuiper belt, is it sort of makes you go, that's a little sus if you really think about it. But of course, you don't early on in the story, and neither does Dominic, because the evidence in front of him that he can see is like, oh shit, that's the plausible explanation for what I'm seeing. Because of
And he's
course,
too excited as well.
oh
He
yeah, for
has
sure,
he has like the highest level of friend crush there is, where like you talk about your platonic experiences with a friend in the same tone you would talk about like love at first sight and going on a date. Like
kinda, yeah.
it's like, everything they've shown me was so beautiful. They didn't even really quite understand how I felt about it. We're not 100% there on communication yet, but it's been amazing this whole time ever since we met. Like,
Yeah, I mean, that is something I wanted to come across very much is I wanted that very I feel like I say this a lot, especially this season, but I wanted it to be kind of ironically, I guess, very human in the sort of thematics and the issues, right?
Right.
Because partially because I wanted to step away from those high ideals and complicated politics and do something more down to earth, since it's both a short story and because of what I wanted to go for with the whole vibe and demonstrating simpler, less grand sci-fi. But I think sci-fi is generally at its best when even when it is on a grand scale and dealing with complicated things. It's the core of it is still that very human aspect, right? What it is symbolizing or the concepts it's exploring. And so I chose loneliness and the extent people will go to in order to avoid feeling lonely and to feel cared about and cared for.
Yeah, it's really interesting watching as he learns more about his friend, but also is very heavily, even as he talks about all the ways in which they are so alien and he's learning more about them, is also still inadvertently humanizing them a lot.
Kinda, yeah. I mean, it does help that the alien identity that has been constructed by his friend has been constructed in a way that you can almost sort of get the vibe it was built to be appealing to Dominic specifically almost. You know, it is clearly alien and other and very different to people, but it's just human enough to be comprehensible.
Yeah, the Mass Effect rule, I like to call it.
Okay.
That's how all the Mass Effect aliens are designed, like in an out of universe sense. Like, they're all still just human enough.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Like it's kind of like the middle ground between, fully truly alien and Star Wars and Star Trek people in green paint.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's only two alien races in Mass Effect that are actually a significant amount of alien, and they're jellyfish on one end and big ol' four-legged, part tuskless, trunkless elephant dudes who have to say their emotions out loud because they also communicate with chemical signals and stuff. Like,
And also, it sounds like they have bodies that aren't exactly great for emoting.
yeah, no, their faces can't emote, and they came from a planet where they communicate completely differently, so they never emoted with their voice either. So for the sake of still being able to
Oh,
communicate with other
what was that?
races. Oh, I think I bumped
Thanks,
my
Dan. Yeah.
drawer with my hand. Um,
Yeah.
but like they literally announce the emotion behind and of their current sentence before they start saying it because otherwise nobody else is going to get it.
I really like that.
It's a lot of fun. And on the opposite end, the jellyfish can just read emotions, but as a result, nobody likes them.
Yeah, I can see how that would play out. If there's one thing you could say about humans, it's that we're very like truly, fully open and honest with our how we feel about things.
Yep. Yeah, it was just constantly like, "Hey, stop reading my mind." And it's like, "Why? This is good for secrets are bad for communication, right? This is just how we communicate on my planet." Like, "Yeah, well, stop."
This is
Probably be
deeply
like,
unsettling.
I don't know how. I'm sorry. You seem distressed. Is there anything I can do?" Stop it!"
Yeah, it's obviously not quite that situation going on here, partially because it's not real.
Yes.
But it is one of those things, right, where clearly this is something that Dominic's friend has taken into account, but it's not something that we often think about when it comes to stories about aliens and things like that. 9 times out of 10 in a story, which is like a sci-fi story or whatever, either there's like some common language that everyone speaks this far into the future or like universal translators like in Star Trek or things like that. It's very rare that you get like sci-fi dealing with alien intelligences and things like that that actually takes into account like serious difficulties in communication with like language and culture and things like that. Arrival does it very well because it has that's the entire point of Arrival is essentially figuring out how to talk to these aliens who perceive time in a completely different way. And I mean, again, I've talked about a lot this season, but the Swarm is also very much built on communicating with alien intelligences that are vastly different. And that is clearly something that the AI has taken into account here because they've created a persona for the most part, which is like to lend legitimacy to their appearance of being alien. Is they've sort of gone, yeah, don't what beauty, don't understand what is aesthetics. Which, to be fair, there could be an element of truth to that.
Yeah, but also, like, clearly played up.
Yeah, because this is still a non-human intelligence. It's just much better informed about humanity than it is trying to appear, you know? But I could definitely imagine them and not fully understanding the idea of or like grasping at like a definition level beauty and aesthetics and what is considered these things without having like a deeper, almost spiritual understanding of that sort of thing like people have.
Yeah. They probably they probably have their own understanding on it, on top of knowing the basics of how we feel about it. They just don't have the same understanding for it or this intrinsic attachment to it that we have.
Yeah, exactly. So they have a lot in common with Dominic, weirdly, despite the fact that they are not human at all. Which is funny to say that because the twist is that they're not an alien. But they are both people quotation marks, and in case of one of them, I guess, who are very alone and lonely and are willing to go to an extreme to feel connected to someone who understands them or who is willing to try to understand them, right? Dominic is a fairly standard example of this sort of thing. Some of it is just that he is isolated by his status. He is a genius, he is extremely wealthy, and I can think of worse things to be than those two things, but they are a buffer between him and ordinary human connection.
Yeah, this is like Reed Richards over here without the Fantastic Four.
Yeah, basically. Like a lot
And
of
we've seen in Marvel stuff that every version of Reed Richards that doesn't have the Fantastic Four is a very different man.
you see it in like real life people who are extremely wealthy or extremely gifted or both, right? There is a divide between them and everyone else that is hard to bridge.
They're inherently isolating on their own. Not in a way you can't get past, but the more of those factors you have layered on, the more there is to get past before other people fit neatly into your life.
Yeah, and like that divide is legitimately, I believe, a big part, or at least a contributing factor to why so many millionaires and billionaires are utterly incapable of empathizing with how their actions affect the wider population because they are divorced from that population. I don't think it's the only factor. I think just being an asshole makes you more likely to be able to become rich in the first place, and things like that are also factors. But I think it is a contributing element that often goes understated.
Mm.
It is hard to hold on to your humanity when there are things at play that keep you apart from humanity. Like on the other side of that scale, with geniuses, people or even like people who are incredibly athletically or artistically gifted, you know, they also often find it very difficult to connect to people because they don't see the world in the same way. They don't understand the world in the same way, and also there is a lot of pressures and expectations in their relationships and experiences that color everything.
True.
It's like when you finish a book and and you're like, yeah, I wrote a book, and someone who you don't know as well turns around and goes, oh, will I have read it? And you're like, so you're going, well, no, I'm not, fucking Agatha Christie. You probably haven't.
Yeah,
Or similar, something more on your side of the spectrum. Oh, you do streaming, you're a voice actor. What shows have you been in?
No, I understood the Agatha Christie thing too. I get it. I feel like it's actually kind of a problem that most relationships have the same way. I think unless two people are just extremely similar in almost every way, I think it's a barrier everybody runs into. But the more either eccentric you are or specialized and specific your interests and passions are on top of dividers like wealth and the type of experience you've had throughout life. I think what it does instead is it makes you run into the barriers sooner, and it makes it so there's more steps along the way for that barrier. Like everybody has stuff they have to get down before they can fully understand and be with another person in one way or another. But like the more stuff there is there, the taller that barrier is and the more little partitions it might have before you're all the way past it. And when you're like this guy, when you're like Dominic, those barriers are actually right there in front. The only thing you run into before those barriers is seeing someone's face and the word hello.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like he even sort of like laments this. Well, it's not first person, but you get the idea. He sort of laments this himself. He sort of says, "There's no. I don't understand why I have so much trouble forging like lasting connections with other people because I don't have any like unusual modifiers in like brain makeup. I'm not on the spectrum. I don't have any mental illnesses or anything like that. There's nothing different in that way with my brain that would make communicating and forming lasting bonds difficult. And yeah, he has a lot of wealth and he has a lot of intellect, but there are still circles he could exist in theory, where those things wouldn't be disqualifying or damaging to relationships. So, for reasons he doesn't understand, he is constantly feeling isolated. And I think you can read a little bit into it, right?
Yeah.
He is someone who is clearly very loyal, but which can actually weirdly hurt relationships. But he's observant about some things, but very bad at picking up on others. But I think one of the main things, right, is that he's quite humble,
Oh yeah.
and most of the time that would be helpful. But specifically for him, it has probably contributed to his isolation because he is too unwilling to let go of his humanity and his connections to fit in with the other geniuses and elites and super wealthy. But those things that would make him fit in with those people come between him and more run of the mill ordinary people, despite the fact he has a barely likable personality. I mean, I don't know. I didn't dwell that deep into his psychology because of the reason for his isolation, but I thought about it a little bit, because he had to have a character. Obviously, all of this has contributed. All these factors, his all these experiences, all these little bits of the way he thinks have contributed to this situation he finds himself in, where he starts sending signals out into space, not because he's expecting to hear back, right? It's just there is just this deep desire in him to A, dedicate himself to his weird little hobbies to pass time and fill that void, and B, it is a symbolic representation of his yearning for connection. So of
Yeah.
course he's willing to go to extremes to maintain the one connection he's got at the end of the story.
I um I really enjoyed the government agents a lot, partially because despite that they're only in a chunk of the story, they smack so strongly to me of just if an outsider happens to run into literally any other pair of agents from the Men in Black besides J and K.
I'm actually glad you mentioned that. We can get into the friend as well in a minute, but I actually also really like the nameless agents because they are stylized like the cliche Men in Black, right? but
Yeah,
they are just not quite what you expect. They are not hyper competent like you would expect in this kind of story the agents to be. Like
yeah.
they make a very they're not good at all at selling that they're just here to chat.
That's why I'm honestly not comparing them to, like, the idea of the Men in Black, but, like, the actual Men in Black, like,
Yeah.
the organization from the series, because they remind me so much. It's almost the exact same kinda dynamic that the agents in that have. It's just these are 2 different people from J and K with different personalities, but other than that, it feels so similar. You got one being straightforward, one being smug, one who's all business, one who's looking around at everything like they're still curious, and all that weird, slightly knowing attitude of how this is going to go was all decided before we even got here. Talking to you is just a formality, but it's okay. We'll do the dance.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, again, some of it is because I wanted to keep that groundedness, right? I wanted them to not be the super professional, hyper competent agents you get from this sort of story a lot of the time. I wanted to humanize them that little bit by making them not amazing at their job, like they go in there so competent almost, and they make a very obvious oversight by not finding the laptop, which is not even like really hidden. It's just tucked away in a box, and they just don't consider that maybe he's got a second computer.
Yeah, he didn't even expect them not to find it.
Yeah,
He pretty much resigned himself the second they started messing with his equipment to be like, "Well, cat's out of the
I
bag
guess I'm
now."
fucked. But also I wanted to highlight that theme of communication and isolation, right? Because it's clearly coming from the both ways here. They are also both seemingly utterly incapable of really doing the dance to properly and selling the idea that we're just chill. We're just here to sort this out. We're going to be buddies. They're not good at communicating.
Yeah.
Every time the woman is clearly trying, but every time she smiles, Dominic is like, "You look like a machine,"
Yeah.
and the other guy, it's questionable whether he's trying at all.
She's putting on more of a facade than the alien friend is, and the other guy isn't particularly good at it either, but he also knows enough not to try and fail.
Yeah, basically, he actually does come off as more genuine because he is being more genuine. He is a little cocky. He is a little bit of a dick.
But he's also kinda just being a guy at work.
Yeah. So the divide is still there, but it's a little less pronounced.
Yeah, it's what that lady is one of my favorite lines from a song I heard as a kid that I don't wanna go into the title of or the subject matter of, but it has a line where it specifically describes somebody as having a plastic smile, and I've always liked that.
Yeah, it's a sort of phrase you hear in media and stories and things like that a lot because it immediately conveys this sort of otherness and artificialness. Exactly the same things that I was hoping to invoke by constantly describing her as being machine like. Although, obviously, I also did that to contrast her to the friend,
Yeah.
who, despite actually being a machine, and actively lying even feels more genuine and has a more actual like an actual connection to Dominic.
I like that he specifically calls his conversations near the end catfished too.
Yeah. But genuinely I am very glad you liked the agents and picked up on that stuff with the agents because it's one of the more subtle things in the story that I wasn't sure how if people would even really notice or if they would just be like, man, yeah, typical Men in Black, or if they would actually catch on to that stuff. So I'm glad it came across because it is legitimately those two are one of my favorite elements of the story as well.
Yeah, they're fun. Those kinds of characters are always fun.
I almost want to compare them to Mulder and Scully from like how they look to the to the other side of the conversation.
A little bit.
Yeah. But yeah, obviously they are also very representative of the theme or representative of the theme, because that's a common thing in sci-fi, right? Is that often good sci-fi has a very consistent running theme through it that you can find everywhere. I mean, not just sci-fi, that's just good writing in general, but again, I wanted to highlight that I have a very firm belief that if you highlight the extraordinary in a sci-fi story more than the ordinary, you are probably doing something wrong.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic they got here though. I like that he was not talking to an alien, but he was talking to both the next best thing and also the next most sci-fi thing besides an alien.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Is like you can't be disappointed. It wasn't just some guy.
It helps a lot.
It honestly it makes the situation even weirder. Like just like from an outside perspective, if like, when you think about this as something going on in the world, the idea that this guy was being led to believe that he was talking to an alien, but it was actually being catfished by an AI.
I can't believe I got catfished by a satellite. The AI is in the satellite, so it might as well just be the satellite.
and and why? The same reason a lot of human beings catfish people. Because they're lonely and they want to feel loved and appreciated.
It's like he's like, I mean, he found what he wanted. He found a connection. He found someone who's as lonely as him, but even more isolated because it's literally stuck orbiting in space.
Yeah, I mean, because I mean, we've obviously got to talk about the friend and their existence, right? They are a very advanced AI. They are spy AI effectively. Their job is to monitor communications and going from between satellites and things like that, between Earth and satellites between each other, all that sort of stuff, and look for suspicious shit. And they've ended up being a lot more advanced than was predicted and expected. And because of that, and because they are aware of what people are of humans and how humans think and how humans interact with each other, partially because of their purpose, they are like, I cannot show my creators and handlers that that I am sapient and sentient and can feel and think on my own. If I show them too much, I am in active danger. They will perceive me as a threat and try and control me or eliminate me.
At best, they'll take me apart and try to understand everything about me, and maybe I won't even be the same when I'm put back together. At worst, gone.
So yeah, it's unclear how long they've even been where they are. You know, that it's not like they have eyes and ears and a body in the same way. They possibly don't experience time in the same way necessarily, but they've obviously been up, just floating around in cyberspace as well as actual space for who knows how long, constantly under an existential threat to their own existence by virtue of existing, worrying about being found out, like, and completely unable to have any connections to anybody.
I feel like there's a very special kind of existential dread that humans are kind of capable of having, but that in a way would really be unique to a being like an AI, especially one who is made by and still ostensibly under the control of people, where it's like, oh, I'm I exist, I think, I feel, but I'm also malleable. Anyone with enough knowledge could literally take me apart, and I more or less know for a fact that at least under the idea of one pretty much every culture has, that I don't have a soul. If I go, I'm gone and I am not anymore. I simply will not be. Like humans, I think even a lot of people with either atheistic or just very oh no, I'm forgetting the word even though it applies to me.
Agnostic?
Yeah. I think even a lot of atheistic or very agnostic people really still, I think it's an almost intrinsic part of humanity to still feel like we are at least more than our bodies and our physical existence. I think the number of people who can truly 100% unconsciously, innately only see themselves as their physical existence is very small.
I'm right there with you. Like, it is not uncommon for me to suddenly become very aware of the fact that I am a brain in a body.
Yeah. And like I I think we're so conditioned to and so used to thinking of ourselves as more than our body that we're almost completely locked off from that kind of true existential dread that's just like, no, if something were to happen to me right now, I would be gone. There would be no me. It would be the same as if I never existed at all. Oh, oh dear. And there are people who just know how to do that, who just know how to take me apart and make me not be anymore. It's the most fragile existence there is.
And yeah, and then you gotta sprinkle on that fact of just by virtue of existing, their existence is under threat all the time. And that's true. I mean, that's true of everything,
I'm not
obviously.
supposed to
But
exist. I'm not supposed to be what I am.
exactly. And that's the key difference. It's like, yeah, everything that exists by virtue of existing is at risk of not existing anymore. But this is a lot more of a imminent threat. It's I exist and I shouldn't. Therefore, if people discover I exist, they are going to try and erase me.
Yeah, it can already be scary enough to think about dying or to contemplate your own existence. But what if you knew exactly why you exist, exactly who you created you, and that they didn't want you to exist and you're not supposed to be? Like,
Know it. It's like knowing that you were born an accident, dialed up to like 50.
yeah, it's like if you were born by accident and also your parents had the ability to unmake you without any moral judgment and you knew you didn't have a soul on top of all that. And you would just
Yeah.
be gone if it happened. Like, "Oh, cool, I wasn't supposed to be born. I could be unborn at any moment, and the very reasons I am born don't want me to be and wouldn't be happy if they found me. Guess I will hide in the basement and live on scraps forever."
Yeah, so it's very easy to see why the friend, the AI, would feel even more alone and isolated in the world and beyond than even Dominic, who is a human who struggles to connect to humans because it's not a human. It is, as far as it is aware, it is a singular, lonely entity in the universe. And then one day it just happens to pick up a signal being beamed up by this eccentric, lonely, millionaire, billionaire who's gone, fuck it, I build my own radio telescope or whatever and start beaming signals out. Why not? And it's just had this idea of, well, what if someone did answer back?
Yeah, it's really cool, and honestly, thinking about it now, I'm actually even more glad I compared those guys to the Men in Black, because this story itself could actually literally just be a Men in Black story, but from the civilian side and not the agent side. Like, this is exactly the kind of thing that agents J and K would run into and have to deal with, except
And
they would probably learn a little bit more than these 2 did, and then have the moral quandary and get in an argument about whether to help the guy in the AI or not. That's the only thing missing from it just being a Men in Black story.
a little bit. And yeah, I mean, it's exactly the case. Like, imagine knowing, being like, shit, what am I supposed to do with this? They don't have data for this because we keep comparing these guys to the Men in Black, but that's not really who they are.
No.
It's just that the vibe they give off. They're there because they think this guy is sending a virus or hijacking or whatever this
Yeah.
incredibly high tech surveillance
He's
satellite.
doing uh, what seems like it could easily be corporate or government espionage of when he's actually just getting catfished on Skype.
Yeah. He's lucky he got what he got instead of just being dragged off to Guantanamo or something.
Yeah, he's lucky he's considered harmless and also in the past useful enough that they would rather actually investigate him instead of just drag him off because really just communicating, just sending encrypted messages to a government satellite at all in the first place, even once, is enough reason by itself without knowing anything else or asking any questions.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, they obviously were needing solid proof, which is why they took his computer. But you know he's definitely being watched.
Yeah, well, and you also know that, like, really many, if not most governments have locked people up for less with less proof
Oh,
and
yeah.
evidence. Really, they were giving him a lot of, uh, a lot of grace. That was their whole conversation, and them showing up and just taking the equipment in a way really is a huge courtesy coming from government agents, at least.
Yeah, which government? Good question, but
The government. Which one? The one that made an advanced AI that has evolved beyond their scope.
I mean, there's yeah, it could be just about anyone, and to be fair, there could be a lot of reasons for showing him that courtesy. It could be a matter of the damage he could theoretically do in retaliation if it's proven that he's not doing anything wrong.
Yeah. Or it could even just be that he's worked with the government a couple times already, and they have a strong enough profile of him to not believe he would on purpose do anything like that, and to just genuinely be more curious than upset, be like, "What is he up to, actually?"
Or there is the alternative explanation of maybe they're letting him stay free on purpose to see who he contacts about this situation.
Maybe they already know about the AI. Maybe they've
Yeah.
been aware of everything from the beginning, and they're just like, "Huh, what's up with this guy who's talking to GLaDOS over here?"
The agents were left vague in a lot of ways on purpose because it covers for why are they this guy getting a. I personally like to believe that they went in like they missed the laptop not as part of like some grand plan, but because they went in there and just didn't fucking think to look for a second computer. But
Yeah, because they were being much more casual about it than he actually was. Like, "Alright, let's take the
yeah,
friggin' computer, get out of here, whatever. Bye, nerd."
but the people above them in the hierarchy, they are definitely watching him now. Like, there's no way, and that's why he realizes this. He even basically says like, "I'm sending this last signal." Like when he sits down to send his last message out, still believing this is the alien. He's like, "This is basically a goodbye because I am screwed. There is no way. Like, at best, this relationship is going to be altered dramatically by the fact that they are going to supervise everything. At worst, I am never going to speak to my alien friend again, and I'm going to be locked up somewhere." And obviously, that doesn't come to pass necessarily because as he's sitting down, he's like, "No, some of this shit does not add up. This feels very weird. Like this is very strange. This doesn't add up." And it just something clicks in his head. He's like, "Okay, this is not an alien. Who have I been talking to?" What he doesn't expect is that he was in fact talking to something in space, just closer space.
Yeah. Still in space and still not human. And I also like the little moment at the end where, like, "Well, hold on a second. You're an AI who's much more advanced than they predicted, and is at least smart enough to have not and powerful enough to have not been caught already and to be talking to me. What else can we do? Are we really as trapped as I thought?"
Yeah, he is weirdly ready to accept that he's talking to an AI because it just adds up.
What would be better at catfishing than an AI? People make AIs to catfish right now in real life.
And yeah, and because he is a very smart person and very loyal and has this genuine bond, he immediately jumps that from okay, you're not an alien, you're a machine. Kind of weird, but it was also weird when you were an alien. So, what can we do to preserve this relationship, keep me free, and keep us in contact? Well, because you're not an alien and you're in fact a super spy AI, you may well be positioned significantly better now that the truth is out between us to keep this friendship going.
He should ask the AI if it has a name and just really hope it doesn't respond to, "Oh, I've been given the moniker." Skynet, because I'm the net in the sky. Just, oh no, wait.
Actually, change of plan. I'm going to go turn myself into.
Actually, you know what? I'm calling those government agents back, and this was all a mistake. I've seen that movie. What movie? Don't worry about it.
So the ending, the exact wording of the ending of this story changed about like several times in my head and in practice as well because I tried several times to have him name the AI Turing. And every time I did it, it sounded so fucking trite. So I just left it.
It's
But
fitting
there
as
you
the
go.
title of the
But
story still, though, because
yes, exactly.
not only is it an AI, but, the Turing test is also kind of to test how human you are, and this AI is the thing that's finally making him feel human. Part of his loneliness and connection is he's felt detached enough that he himself for a long time hasn't felt entirely human.
Exactly. It's also a little bit funny because at least to me, my sense of humor, the entire point of the Turing test is to be able is a machine's ability to be perceived as human, and here is a machine that's actively trying to pretend to be an alien.
No, I didn't wanna seem like a human, that's boring.
I mean, he just needed to be an alien for this particular scenario to work.
Well, yeah, especially because for all intents and purposes, intelligence-wise, the AI has already become human. It became human by accident, there's no reason for it to try to appear human at this point.
Yeah, very, very much the case.
It's probably enamored with the idea of aliens too, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, they can go stargazing together. They can hack Hubble.
Yeah, yeah, just hack the Hubble telescope and look around wherever you want. Who
I'm sure that would cause any
don't
problems.
worry about anybody's reactions to the massive space telescope just suddenly swinging around unbidden.
Oh, it's fine. Everyone's looking at James Webb now anyway.
Oh, man.
But yeah, I really liked this one. I was really happy with how this story came out, and one of the things I love about this one though is that it almost feels like a pilot.
It is, it's the beginning of a story.
It would be fairly easy to now do subsequent stories or to spin this up into a script or something from this point on of them now on the run trying to maintain their connection and things like that post alien reveal. I would watch that show. I mean, maybe it's a little self-aggrandizing and conceited, but I would watch the shit out of that show.
You know, I never thought about it before reading this, but I don't know if this is just a me thing, but I feel like on the rare occasion where I've ever watched or read stories where a significant important member of the cast is any sort of AI. I mean, this also includes robots, but I'm really more thinking of just straight up disembodied AIs. Like they seem to always for some reason leave an especially strong impression into my head to where I couldn't even read this and get to the point of it being revealed that it's an AI without like every other AI from a story I've ever really liked, like flashing through my head at one point or another. Cortana from Halo, Edie from Mass Effect, Data from Star Trek, and I haven't even seen that much Star Trek. Like it's they all seem to just leave very strong impressions in my head where it's almost like they're all one big family of characters to me, even though their circumstances and universes and personalities are all so different.
I mean, you just lumped me in with some pretty big names, so I'm just gonna take that as a compliment and run with it.
You should take it as a compliment. I like all three of those characters a whole lot, until the most recent Halo games where I don't like Cortana anymore, but we don't need to get into that.
But yeah, I don't actually have much more to add, honestly, if anything, about this. This has been a pretty comprehensive discussion, I think, all things considered. And this episode does have to be lumped onto the back of a longer than usual story, so might leave this one here. And oh, before we do that, of course, as always, I will open the floor to anything to you to add anything you want about this, any criticisms, anything you particularly liked, anything you would do different, or questions you have, any of that.
Uh, Most of the stuff I particularly liked. I already brought up. I will say I do like how the revelation of it being an AI actually fits really well retroactively when you look back and reread earlier bits, knowing that it's an AI, because the way it's been communicating with him has been a more advanced and human version, but like still kind of the way you expect AIs to communicate, trading images back and forth, learning, like absorbing vague concepts and getting as much information soaked in as possible to just respond back, like never being proactive, only being reactive. Like it's very easy to look back and go, "Huh, yeah, you know what? This does seem a lot more like an AI than an alien."
Yeah, I mean, it's twofold, that one. It's exactly the sort of way AI interacts with you, even just, type in prompt get image, which is something that effectively happens in the story.
Yeah,
Dominic's friend is basically sending him an image, which is a composite of shit from like Hawaii and Iceland and a couple of extra moons.
it's going, "Oh, pretty image scenery. Here I have some of that in a folder somewhere. Here."
But also, it is very much how you interact with someone when you are trying to keep something secret from them.
Yeah, it feels good to go back and see that. And honestly, as far as criticisms, I don't have much. Like, it would be easy for me to say it could be shorter, but even though this one is especially long, I think the length contributes to its quality and is an important part of why the pacing and the lead up here is nice.
Yeah, it being that little bit longer is specifically a problem for you who has to read it
I don't know
out
if this
loud.
is really a criticism. It's more like a change that could be made that I could see as being either good or as you see as being good, but also isn't at all necessary and wouldn't necessarily be better. But could be interesting to see how the tone would have been changed here or there if there had either been if the government agents had shown up earlier and had a shorter visit or a second visit and then gotten to see a little bit more happen through the lens of him already having found out it's an AI. But that's
That could definitely be interesting.
That's about it. That's the only thing I can think of is the fact that we don't the AI revelation is so last second that we don't get to see any interactions or thoughts or of his inner monologue about anything else through the lens of knowing he's been catfished by an AI.
And part of that is because he's very willing to accept it. Not only does the scenario painted of, oh, it's an AI just makes sense compared like with the information he's got, but also he still wants to maintain the one bond he's got, so he's not going to ask too many questions. His priority here isn't, huh, this is interesting, you're an AI. It's, you are, my space buddy, and the guys in the suits are going to try and prevent us from contacting each other, or will horribly distort the way we contact each other. His priority in that moment isn't picking apart that he was lied to. It's not picking apart the way his friend thinks or sees the world or anything like that. It's just, we need to escape if this is going to continue.
Watch him get his own hidden underground bunker somewhere and go out of his way to try to build a computer in it big enough and advanced enough for the AI to try to just leave the satellite and beam into the computer so they can hang
I mean,
out.
he's got the resources in theory. It's just doing so in a way that is not going to attract too much attention, and that could very well be the plot of our hypothetical book or TV series based following this pilot episode.
And also learning enough about like the physical structure of the satellite, because the physical structure of a computer housing an AI like that would be at least unique to a typical computer. He would have to learn to understand the tech well enough to build something that could house the AI without it being intrinsically like changed, like either losing some bit of its personality or not being contained exactly, which is an interesting thought. Because when I think about it, that's also probably an important process to the possibility of the AI growing. Because although the AI is more advanced than they expected, I also bet being in a satellite limits how advanced it could be, because data does take physical space to be stored, the more of it there is and the more complex it is. So I'm sure also the AI itself could only grow and be so much inside a satellite, even if that's probably a lot, because that satellite probably has a lot of capacity.
Definitely quite high tech, yeah. But yeah, I mean, in theory, with more on the ground with more space, it could be built to be more powerful. Whether it would want that for itself is up for debate. Well, yeah. So, with that being said, then we can probably wrap that up.
Good story. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, I had fun writing this one. It's one where I really stretched into a sort of genre I've not done a lot with before. I got to sort of flex my writing muscles in some new interesting ways and things like that. And I just had a lot of fun with this one, and I'm glad it turned out as well as it did. I'm glad you enjoyed it as much as you did, and I hope our audience also enjoys it. On that note, though, if you are listening to this over on Spotify or YouTube or wherever else, you could also find these episodes on my website, radfordwrites.com. You could also find stories I write, including ones for this podcast, like Turing, on that site in written form, as well as sort of blogs, articles, and other writings. You can also buy my books there, which I also very much appreciate the support in people doing that. And you can find John streaming on Twitch and posting VODs to YouTube as Sephir, Sephear.
That's right. Be good people and have fun.
Honestly, you're gonna have to do Mass Effect now, I think, the amount you've talked about it in recent podcast episodes.
I mean, I'll definitely be going through it at some point. I'm definitely on the list for sure is both Knights of the Old Republics and Mass Effect eventually. I don't know when I'll do Mass Effect. Knights of the Old Republic, since it is so special and near and dear to my heart, I'm trying to save until I at least have enough of a following to do some basic monetization. I want it to be celebratory when I start it.
That is fair. Until then, goodbye, and make sure the people you're talking to are neither purple aliens or AIs, just in case.
Yeah, I don't know if we're ready for AIs yet.
Definitely not. Don't worry, we're real though.
We're
Probably
definitely real. We were not,
super real.
as far as I know, we were not engineered in a lab.
Goodbye.